Mothership's taking fire. I've got your wing covered. Set close for a missile.
You are watching the Sci-Fi Channel.
A really cool museum and an illustrator so hot we couldn't keep him off the air any longer. Next on The Buzz. This week on The Buzz, pop culture fantasy artist Bernie Wrightson and a medley of his monsters. A high-tech heaven for fans of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Harlan Ellison's commentary. And Spielberg blasts into outer space with his new primetime series, Earth 2.
We have crashed onto this planet. We have lost most of our cargo.
We've rolled Snake Eyes here at Sci-Fi Central. Hi, Buzzers. Get on over here to the computer. I've just been noticing here a lot of superheroes leaping to the big screen these days, some doing better than others. A few weeks ago, I told you about Spider-Man caught in a web of lawsuits. Yeah, that's bad news. Also now, The Phantom, the movie, up in the air. They're supposed to start shooting the film last month. They don't even have a star of the film yet. But we hear it's going to be Billy Zane. Who? Why don't they talk to me, huh? Meanwhile, back over at Marvel, Stan Lee and Company, they've been given the okay for the Daredevil. Now, this is the guy, this is a blind lawyer who runs around in red spandex. Who doesn't? But, sure, he's blind, but he has heightened other senses. His four other senses are very heightened, like his sense of smell. What is that? It's you, Susan!
Yeah.
Oh, intoxicating.
Get off of me.
You know enough about Daredevil and all those guys. What about you? You tell me what is hot in your life. What's hot in sci-fi?
Well, it's not what, it's who. Bernie Wrightson. Great fantasy artist, draws monsters. We were at a convention recently, and he was there. His fans were going nuts. They were trying to get their hands on anything he drew, and they would pay any amount of money to get it.
The candy store that I used to go to had an entire wall filled with a comic book rack. And out of all these comics, all the Superman and Batman and Richie Rich and Baby Huey, all that stuff, EC comics were the ones that I immediately focused on. That was my stuff. That was my stuff. Everything else was a cartoon, but this was reality. This was real. This was creepy stuff.
Bernie Wrightson absorbed the freaky visual flair of comic book artists like Graham Ingalls and eventually carved his own niche as a top pop culture fantasy artist. His professional peaks have been fondly recounted in an elaborate literary tribute called Bernie Wrightson, A Look Back.
You know, it's almost embarrassing because, you know, most artists have to be dead to have something like this. You know, it's like, you know, a whole career right there. And, you know, just seeing this thing, you know, sometimes I just kind of flinch a little bit because it's, it really is pretty impressive.
The book chronicles Wrightson's early days as a hack artist for DC Comics, where he honed his craft drawing monsters for mystery titles like House of Secrets. But his big break came in the early 70s when DC offered him and writer Len Wein the chance to create their own comic book.
And we started Swamp Thing. You know, Len and I got together and said, let's do something really commercial. Okay, we can do something commercial, but there are a lot of things I don't want to draw. You know, if we're talking about superhero comics, I don't want to draw cities, I don't want to draw cars, you know, and stuff like that. He said, what do you like to draw? I said, like swamps. You know, so, you know, little by little we got this thing, you know, down to a monster hero kind of thing. We were just a bunch of kids having fun.
After producing 10 much-lauded issues, the success of Swamp Thing sent Wrightson's career soaring. He was now a bona fide superstar in the world of comic books. But after 6 years in the business, Wrightson was ready for a new creative outlet.
7 or 8 years old, staying up late for the first time Saturday night, watch Shock Theater, the original Frankenstein with Boris Karloff, just scared the hell out of me. It was great.
Wrightson began an illustrated version of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, strictly as a labor of love, in 1975. It was eventually published by Marvel in the early 80s, but has been out of print for several years. In a shrewd move, Charles Miller has reissued the book to coincide with Kenneth Branagh's big screen adaptation, and Wrightson played a peripheral role in the making of the film.
The screenwriter, Frank Darabont, sent me a copy of the screenplay, and he wanted permission to use some of the illustrations from the book in the screenplay, just as, not as production designs for the movie or anything else. He said it was just to set the mood for the script, just because he's a fan of my work and he liked the drawings. And I told him yes. And of course got my hopes way up, you know. I said, hey, Kenneth Branagh, you know, he's going to see this. And, but, you know, the phone never rang.
Fortunately, Wrightson has bounced back from the Branagh brush-off. He still cooks up the occasional Captain Stern comic for kitchen sink. And Friedlander Press has just released a second set of Wrightson trading cards from their Master of the Macabre series called More Macabre. With a Batman Aliens comic crossover also on the horizon, Wrightson's career appears to be as piping hot now as it was after Swamp Thing 2 decades ago.
I have had such a good time doing this stuff, and I don't know, almost feel guilty for taking money for it.
Steven Spielberg's primetime expedition to a distant planet after this refreshing recess. Hey, Brave Dave, throw me one of those, will you? Now, Dave says we have a bunch of these Sci-Fi Buzz t-shirts. You can buy one, send a check for $15 to Sci-Fi Buzz. I'll give you the address in just a second. This is what you need to do. Give us your name, address, and whether you want a medium, large, or extra box while he's not eating like he did a few weeks ago. Somebody ended up with a meatball grinder in their shirt. They weren't happy. All right, enough pitching. How about Steven Spielberg? He wants to pitch you something. It's called a new TV series, and the name of it is Earth 2.
I don't know. Maybe we had no right, Yale. Maybe we're not supposed to go to the end of the universe to save ourselves.
Maybe we just haven't gotten there yet.
Imagine it's 200 years in the future, and our world is so polluted that we can't live here anymore. What would we do? We'd have to find another home, of course. That's the premise of Earth 2, the latest Sunday night sci-fi offering on NBC.
It's just so hard to believe. If this is anything like Earth was hundreds of years ago.
It's a second chance. The odds are unbelievable.
Led by scientist Devin Adair, played by Deborah Ferrantino of NYPD Blue fame, a handful of explorers travel 23 light years to a new world. When their ship experiences mechanical problems, the futuristic colonists crash land on the desolate side of Earth 2. The new settlers must then trek the 3,400 miles to the temperate zone where human life can be sustained.
You're crazier than I'd heard. You can't just drag this group across whatever the hell landmass this is. Half of us weren't even supposed to set foot on this planet.
Earth 2 is the second sci-fi TV project by Steven Spielberg's Amblin Television. When the company proposed the idea to their prospective producers, well, it wasn't exactly love at first pitch.
Yeah, they wanted to do Wagon Train on another planet set in the future. And my partners, Mark Levin and Carol Flint, and I sat down, and at first we're fairly resistant to it. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized how strong the premise was.
The producers wanted a fresh look for this new world with unspoiled Earth-like qualities. So they searched from Australia to Utah before selecting the diverse deserts of New Mexico for the show's exterior shooting.
The reason we insisted on coming to a location like this was for the verisimilitude. For the actors really start feeling that they're out in the wild. They are out in the wild.
Of course, the show will have its share of big-budget effects and some pesky indigenous creatures that the space pioneers will have to deal with. But perhaps their biggest foe will be 60 Minutes, which competes in the same time slot. Even so, the cast is not daunted by this challenge.
I don't know. I have a theory. I think, 60 Minutes, people who watch 60 Minutes are going to watch it. They watch it anyway. They eat dinner to it. They, so what?
At first glance, Earth 2 might seem to be a recipe for disaster. It's a big-budget, big-risk newcomer pitted against a hugely popular Sunday night institution. But then again, if the creatures and effects are good enough and the storylines are solid, it just might survive the inhospitable and dangerous world of primetime programming. Next on The Buzz, Harlan Ellison's war story about creating his first comic book. And we discover where all those great old radio and TV shows end up. Our resident commentator on the passing scene is award-winning author Harlan Ellison. When we call him award-winning, that's an understatement. Harlan has won more awards for his 62 books, more than 1,700 stories, articles, essays, and columns than any other living fantasist. His current books are Minefields, Mephisto and Onyx, and I, Robot Screenplay, based on concepts by Isaac Asimov.
Oh, all right, you caught me. Yes, this is one of the secret vaults here in the house. Yes, and you know what's in this secret vault? I'm going to show you what's in this secret vault. In this secret vault, part of my comic collection. Yes, folks, I've been collecting comics since 1939. Look at this. Look at this. Thousands of old comics. Ha ha ha. This is just part of the Marvel stuff. And do you know why I've been collecting comics? Because I love comics. And now, as a matter of fact, I have my own comic. Let me tell you about my own comic. This was not my idea. The producer said, let us do a show about your new comic. My new comic is called Harlan Ellison's Dream Corridor. Now, let me tell you how I came by this comic. About 4 years ago, Showtime, the cable network, came to me and they said, we want you to host a kind of a, show of fantasy stories. And you could do, you could do things like from Dangerous Visions, or you could do your own stories. So I said, that's kind of interesting. So I put together a thing called Harlan Ellison's Dream Corridor. So I put it together with an incredibly interesting framing device, I say with great humility, and we went and we talked about it. And they kind of beetled their brows, and they scratched their heads like the little chimpanzees that they are. And they said, we don't understand what it is you're going to do with this framing device. We want you to do Rod Serling. And I said, no, 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 you don't understand. I'm not Rod Serling. I have a very different kind of act entirely. So they gave it a pass. Now, about 2 months later, 3 months later, HBO comes to talk to me about the same thing. They had heard about this. So I go in and I show them the thing with the framing mechanism and blah, 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 blah. And they say, again, we don't understand. Why don't you have storyboards made up? I said, I got your storyboards right here. Anyhow, it was because storyboards cost a fortune to make. So I let that slide. Now, a little time goes by, and I figure to myself, storyboards. There's got to be a way to have storyboards produced that not only don't cost me any money, but can make me some money. That's what I really wanted to do. And then I thought, epiphany, a comic book. A comic book, at its best, is like great storyboards. And if I can get people to adapt my stories and they look really great, then I'll just show it to these morons at the networks, and they'll go for it, and I'll have my own TV series, and then I can retire to Bora Bora and never have to worry about that moron Charles Platt ever again. Well, folks, the first issue is coming out in January. It's called Harlan Ellison's Dream Corridor. We begin with a special, and then we begin the numbering with #1 in April. And the stories are unbelievable. The great Doug Wildey, who only recently passed away, his last work, he did his last work for my book. He adapted one of my westerns called The End of the Time of Leinard. We got Pat Broderick doing an adaptation of Len Wein doing my story, Quick Time. We've got John Byrne adapting I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Peter David, the great Peter David, who writes The Hulk. Peter David did my story Catman, which is being illustrated by Diodato. It is a great magazine, and in every issue, there'll be an original short story by me around the cover. This is the cover of the first issue. This is an original Stephen Hickman illustration. The second issue is an original Michael Whalen. The third issue is Leo and Diane Dillon. We got the best artists. We got the best writers. They're going to be real, how shall I put this delicately, real fundament-kicking books. And it's my own comic. I got my own comic. You understand what I'm saying here? I'm age 60 and I got my own comic. I am a success at last.
Melinda Lee Wilson from Damascus, Maryland, and I would like to recommend an excellent comic book called Shards. It's put out by Warp Graphics and is part of the Elfquest universe. It's an offshoot of Hidden Years and refers to cutters, tree stumps, and the rest of the elves' battle for the palace. I'd also like to recommend Wave Dancers, which has put out 4 or 5 comic books. It's excellent and good reading.
I'm on 52nd Street in the heart of Midtown Manhattan at a place I've been dying to check out. It's the Museum of Television and Radio, and inside this place, it is jammed with over 60,000 programs that you can listen to and watch, including some of our favorites from the world of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Plus, the place is packed with all sorts of state-of-the-art gizmos that are sometimes more interesting than the programs themselves. Let's check it out. Before I indulged the senses and sat down to watch my favorite video footage of all time, I had a little chat with the museum's president, Bob Baccia. Now, you may get this all the time, I don't know, But there might be some people that say a museum for television and radio. I mean, this isn't fine art.
The problem with television is that we take it too much for granted. It's too easy to have. So we don't look at it as critically as we do a book or a film or a painting. But it is truly one of the most creative mediums of the 20th century.
What do you think are some of the more important contributions to television as far as science fiction is concerned?
Science fiction very often tries to reflect issues that are going on in our society in general and sort of take it out of the present context and in another context to reflect light on, or give light to it. The whole Cold War period was very effectively demonstrated and documented in science fiction.
Most importantly, do you have Sci-Fi Buzz here yet?
Well, we should if we don't.
Let's say I wanted to watch the lunar landing from 1969, July. Is it here, and how do I find it?
Well, what you do is you go to our library, which is entirely computerized and made simple.
Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, Star Trek. Oh my gosh, it's great. Mercury Theater, Lost in Space, Dark Shadows, Captain Video and his Video Rangers.
You would, on the computer, choose the episode that you want to watch. Then the librarian would give you a printout of the programs that you've selected and assign you to one of 96 viewing consoles. And you type the code number in and the program comes up robotically and you sit there with headphones and you enjoy the program.
Let's see, console 40 right here. Got my headsets. And let's see, the lunar landing, number 800. Punch that in.
That's the part right there, just as he puts his first step down. Oh, here he goes. That's right when he should have said, Pepsi! He would have made millions.
Hi.
This place is incredible. I can just slip on some headphones and listen to old sci-fi radio classics like War of the Worlds. Am I in heaven or what?
This has been the ultimate channel surfing experience. It's been a lot of fun, but I'm exhausted. 2-minute break, coming right back.
Astronaut Pete Conrad relives the Apollo 12 moon mission in a comic book. Next.
Incredible space breakthrough, but Apollo 12 was an even bigger deal. The astronauts spent 31.5 hours on the moon. Well, tomorrow marks the 25th anniversary of Apollo 12's liftoff. And what better way to commemorate than with a comic book? It's the 90s.
There it is. Son of a gun, right down the middle of the road. Outstanding. 42 degrees, Pete. Hey, it's starting right from the center of the crater. Look out there. I can't believe it.
You'd have to be in a coma not to realize that the 25th anniversary of the first manned moon landing was last July. But who remembers that tomorrow is the 25th anniversary of Apollo 12, the second moon landing? Well, you should. It was on that mission that the scientific study and exploration of the moon began in earnest.
I have the decided impression I don't want to move too rapidly, but I can walk quite well.
To enlighten people about Apollo 12, Pepper Pike Graphics has put out Moonshot, a comic book which tells the intriguing and sometimes sobering story of the mission. The comic is the brainchild of aerospace writer D.C. Agel. He got the idea when he was looking at the Apollo command module in the Smithsonian. He overheard a father incorrectly explaining to his wife and children how the astronauts landed on the moon.
I told them what happened when the command module circled the moon and the lunar module went down, and I gave them a whole tour of the Air and Space Museum, which I don't know if they appreciated or not, but I was going to give it to them anyway. And at the end of that, I said, you know, you can buy some books for your kids in the gift shop. And the mother looked at me and she just, you know, snorted. She goes, my kids read nothing but comic books.
A light bulb went on in Agel's head. The project really got rolling when he suggested the idea to Pete Conrad, the commander of Apollo 12.
The biggest thing I think we need today is to keep the interest in space. And I go back to my days of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. And then, of course, I got interested in the airplanes when I was a little boy. And all of a sudden, when he said comic book, that said, gee, this is a great way to not only entertain the kids, but to get their interest up.
Pete became a technical consultant on the comic book, and his wife, Nancy, the editor-in-chief.
We're trying also with this book to bring back to the children and to the American culture the real concept of hero, and people who really did stick their necks out and who really have done something for their nation and done something for history.
Pete Conrad reports that your program is in.
Among the Apollo 12 highlights recounted in Moonshot is the nearly disastrous lightning bolt incident. Seconds after liftoff, the Saturn V rocket, carrying the equivalent of a small atomic bomb's worth of fuel, was struck by lightning.
In all the simulations, they'd never figured out how to screw up our whole electrical system. And that lightning strike did it in a matter of fractions of a second. And when I looked up at our caution and warning panel, we had 11 electrical warning lights in the system, and all 11 of them were on.
The comic also tells how Pete and fellow moonwalker Alan Bean got so covered with moon dust that command module pilot Dick Gordon wouldn't let them back in the module until they stripped.
We wound up first taking off our suits, and then finally we had to take off our underwear, and there we were, 250,000 miles from home in the LEM with no clothes on.
The shocking true story is revealed in Moonshot. Plus, there are astronaut interviews, illustrated tech notes, an interview with a lunar geologist, and lunar trivia. You can order Moonshot by phone from the U.S. Space
Buzz out of here. And speaking of buzzing, please contact us at the channel, look for the lab, and then you go to the Sci-Fi Buzz board. Let me know what you're thinking. Talk to me, in other words. And I'll see you next week for more Sci-Fi Buzz.
The mysteries of aliens, the magic of Houdini, the miracles of angels. Now the real stories, people, and events are explained in a thrilling new series, Mysteries, Magic, and Miracles, hosted by Patrick McNee, coming up next on the Sci-Fi Channel.